Hey now, welcome to another wonderful special edition of The Upgrade. My name is Gary Muttley. He is the one and only
Len Carmichael, Landmine Studios.
What's up, Len?
Jack shit, bud. Just hanging out. Long day. Been chasing the IRS for my money, but it finally showed up today. I got my check.
When they want your money, they'll get it right away.
Yeah.
When they're supposed to give you money,
literally,
no rush.
I'm literally talking about I got my taxes from 2019. I'm not even talking about stimulus, and I don't even want to go into how much they say they're going to give me for my stimmy, because it is not much. Like, I could probably get 4 packs of strings and a pack of picks for how much money they're giving me on this stimulus.
And they'll be the cheapo strings too.
Yeah, like the $3 packs. But otherwise, just hanging out, trying to avoid this coronavirus that's kicking up even harder now with all these black country variants that they're throwing.
I'm just trying to stay awake, unlike Frankie Edgar.
Oh, Jesus. That poor man.
Yeah. Good fight, but...
Well, it's not a fight. It was 28 seconds of a flat line.
Exactly.
Poor kid.
Yeah, I mean, overall, good card, but a little... there were a couple of bad ones there.
Overeem, it's time to retire.
It's time. Bye-bye.
You're in my top 5 of fighters. I got no problem with you personally, but it is time to stop because you just looked embarrassing. But anyway,
before we go off on fight tangents for another half hour, we do have a guest this week.
That we do, and he's an illustrious guest. He's a man amongst men.
First I've heard that.
Oh man. So no, but seriously, our guest this week is actually somebody who taught me a very instrumental trick in making a guitar sound wonderful. Even if I'm not as talented as this man, the tips he gave me made me a better player. It's Doc. Doc from God Forbid, Doc from Bad Wolves, Vagus Nerve, etc.
The X-Man podcast.
The X-Man podcast. What's your other podcast, Doc?
It's called Last Words. It's weird. I refer to it as a web show because it's on YouTube and we film everything. So it is released as a podcast as well, but I feel like we're doing a TV show. And that's actually initially what it was. They were filming live in studio in New York before the pandemic, and now they're doing it all remote. So I got my finger in a lot of different pots.
I support that though, because if you spread yourself out, something will work. It's like the spaghetti approach, but you gotta make sure it's good sticky spaghetti so everything sticks.
See, I go the other way. When you have 10 jobs and you lose one, you don't feel that bad. it's a way of staving off your own personal obsolescence.
That takes me back to that show, In Living Color.
Oh, yeah, Jamaican?
Job.
I never knew about that Jamaican stereotype, but it's a good stereotype to have.
Yeah, I got no problems with that stereotype of being super hardworking.
Yeah, it's a good one. By the way, what did I tell you about guitar playing that helped you? I don't remember.
So here's the backstory. God Forbid was picking up, and I was in this band Breath of Silence, and I would come see you guys play, and we got to talking. I think we were introduced by this girl Melissa. She's got long.
Yo, shout out to Melissa.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really talk to her anymore. I don't know if you do, but I do. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't see her, but shout out to her.
She moved, though. She moved to Washington State.
Seattle or something like that. So she introduced me to you guys, and I convinced you to teach me some stuff. So I'd come to your house, and you give me guitar lessons. So I showed up with these, 10s. I had 10s on my guitar, and they were like the light-ass 10s, not even like a heavy top, light bottom. And then I had these tiny ass picks. I'm talking they were the .30 something or .40 something.
Oh,
and you're
God.
you can't get anything metal out of this. You got to pick harder. You got to get a harder
paper.
Yeah, pretty much. But I didn't know any better, so I was just trying to have something to play fast. And you're like, no, get a heavy pick and pick that shit real fucking hard. And now, anytime I play, even though I'm not playing the most complicated shit, everybody is always like, yo, your tone is on point, and it's because I pick so hard. Thank you.
Yeah, but listen, it's a lesson Steve Evans taught us on day one when we were in the studio doing Reject the Sickness. He's like, took the amps, turned the gain about halfway where we thought it was, turned the mid-range up, and he's like, there's no heavy button on the board. The tone's from the hands, and so it's like been instilled from that day.
So I get in a lot of arguments with bands at the studio because they'll come in and they want to use those thin ass picks and not pick hard, and they're just like sitting there plucking, and I'm like, yo, you gotta play the fucking guitar. And they're like, well, there's not enough gain. I'm like, the gain is in your hands. If you play it harder, the amp will react better. And no, like, they don't want to hear it from me. But maybe if you tell them, they'll listen.
Well, I say this. I've kind of evolved. I'm not as kind of doctrinaire about these ideas, where I think rules are made to be broken and we should listen with our ears, not with our eyes. And same thing when I've taught people, it's like, listen, if your technique works for you, if a thin pick sounds great with the way you play, if thin strings sound great with the way you play, then do that. Like, you know what I'm saying? There's not one way to skin a cat. And so I know players that are super shredders who play with much thinner picks. I mean, they sound great. And I know Jeff Loomis, who plays with a 2mm pick, and he's on another planet. So it's same thing with Brian from Avenged Sevenfold, another freak of nature guitar player. There's 50 different ways to do it, you know, as long as it sounds good. Right. You know, and sometimes even if it sounds a little weird, but it's your thing and you sound like you, that's cool too. Everyone doesn't have to have quote unquote perfect technique, right?
I certainly don't have perfect technique, but I do rip through strings like a fucking monster. So whatever, it works for me. I evolved it to be what I needed it to be for what I do.
Yeah.
I know what you mean. But here's one thing, though, and we talked about this on the podcast before, and I'm curious to get Doc's take on it. You see a lot of kids going and recording, like in their friend's basement or whatever, because now everybody can have their little recording set up. One of the things that I learned when I was young was that it helped to get in the studio with somebody more experienced and learn about all that stuff. And I think some of these younger kids don't get that now because they're just going to their friend's house and just recording. Like when I did my old band's first demo, we went in with Mike DeJean from Crown of Thorns, plays bass for the Cro-Mags now, and I learned so much from Mike. But I think a lot of bands don't learn the same way because they just go and do their own thing and they don't get under that umbrella of the more experienced guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think there's also a million more resources for prospective producers now. So there's YouTube has endless stuff they can look at. There's things like URM Academy, and what's the other one I was using this other learning thing. But there's just so many resources now that if you're the type of person that is just very curious and you want to learn and you put in the time, you can find out. And keep in mind the technology is so different than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago that it might not even be as applicable, right? But I do think because you're like, oh, here, let's learn miking technique, but they're not even miking shit. They're just using all plugins or Kempers, or it's like, oh, here's how you mic a kit or deal with a kick drum or deal with cymbal phase. It's like, but they're using all
samples.
Samples. So it's some of the skills might not even be as applicable, and they might know things in that realm that maybe some of these other producers aren't even as aware of. So I try not to look at things as, oh, back then it was good and now it's bad. It's just different. Yeah. And a lot of it too is because of the way the industry has changed. A lot of these younger bands, they're just not given the budgets to really even explore a lot of these things, and that's not their fault, right? They just kind of existed in this time and they're expected to do more with less.
Right.
So on that topic, and I understand what you're saying about how things are just different. I do feel like the energy of a band has been kind of muted by everybody focusing so heavily on time alignment. Because if we go back to...
You mean like quantization,
etc., instead of just practice and get to the point where you can physically play the things that you're attempting to play somewhat close to a click. So you're playing to the click, that's fine, but you lose a little bit of that natural energy, in my opinion, when you kind of really force everything onto a grid. And in some cases, it's absolutely necessary. I can't argue that if you have a really sloppy take and that's all you got, then sometimes you gotta fake it. But what I'm saying is, like, we grew up at the same time watching bands that weren't getting as much quantization in the recording process, and I feel like the records had that little something extra that I don't personally feel from some of the new music that I'm hearing. Am I crazy?
No, you're not. But I think in many ways it's like an artisan detail, right? Like, there's a certain kind of listener who's going to gravitate towards a feel or a recording style or an organic sound that unfortunately is not really incentivized in the marketplace, right? So if I go and make sure that my band is super tight, we spend all these months rehearsing and do a record without a click, and we get this cool feel, I don't think all of a sudden now you're going to sell, the band's going to be twice as big or 3 times as big because you made those choices. So the incentive isn't there for people to actually put that effort in. They just have to want to do it that way, right? So it ultimately can't be about, even though to someone like you, it might sound 15% better, it might have a feel, but that really just comes from the artist. And I think the good thing, though, at least from the world we come from, like the hardcore scene, it has gone back more to, what like guys like Kurt Ballou have done, is they've kind of like brought this like hi-fi approach to organic recording. Like hardcore bands have never sounded better, but it still feel like they're still kind of conjuring those vibes from the 90s of the sounds and the harshness, but everything is just better, so I think there is a yearning for some types of listeners and bands to make it sound old school and make it sound organic, and and that's just each band has to kind of figure out what works for them. But there is a lower barrier for entry, whereas like back in the day, like if you wanted to sound tight, you had to be tight. There was no way to fix it after the fact. If you wanted to sing in key, you had to sing in key. You know what I'm saying? There was just so sometimes we look at necessity as like that meant we were like better or cooler. It's like, no, but we just had to be. Doesn't mean we were like more hardworking, even though the work had to be done. There was no way around it. But if we were in today's environment, maybe we wouldn't have done that. You know what I'm saying? So it's like I try not to get too deep into the judgmental side of things, and that a lot of it is just we're just in the environment we're in, and a lot of it we don't have a choice about that, so we have to work with the things we have. So
am I crazy, or did you guys work with Jason Sukoff on something?
Jason Sukoff recorded the guitars and the vocals on Constitution of Treason, and then he did the vocals on the last Gottfried album, Equilibrium.
Okay, because I know he's part of that URM Academy.
He's not.
They bring him up a lot then. He's done some stuff on it.
So Eyal, who is one of the main guys at URM, used to work with Audio Hammer. He had a studio around the corner, a drum studio, and he was part of their whole. It was like him, Mark Lewis, and they had it was they were under the same umbrella as a company, and then they split. So I'm sure he just brings them up, because he's worked on Doth albums and they work together. So I'm sure there's all those connections.
Right. Yeah, because I've heard the name around a bunch, and I'm just like,
Jason.
For some reason, I remembered you bringing him up to me. Long in the past.
He's the man. I mean, he's a character and a half, and he's such a brilliant. Even outside of his production skills and all that stuff, he's just one of the most brilliant musicians I've ever been around.
So let me ask you this. How did you actually get started playing guitar? Because I know that your dad is a piano teacher, but beyond that, like, what drove you to decide that you wanted to pick up a guitar?
It was really just Guns N' Roses /
Same.
You know, I guess you could probably throw some of the, you know, the Metallicas and Nirvanas and Alice in Chains, whatever was going on around that time with MTV or the rock music that I was listening to. I think all had an impact, but there was something about Slash and just the melody, his guitar tone, how cool he looked. It just seemed, and like I said, there's something about that age when you start going through puberty, you know, like 12, 13, and, you know, the hormones start happening, that we start really getting into music and wanting to pick up instruments. I don't really know the connection there, but yeah, and I just started, I stumbled on this old beat up acoustic. I don't even remember how I got it, and I just started messing around with it on my own with no provocation. And my father saw that I was interested, and then when I was graduating from 8th grade to 9th grade, his girlfriend at the time lent us her Ibanez Les Paul.
Okay.
And so that was like my present. And so me and my brother just kind of shared that guitar. It was like, and after sitting there struggling with this acoustic that was probably with action that was probably an inch high and hurting my fingers and everything, was like, you know, the weights coming off the, your back, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can play things. And we just devoured it. And
yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, we just devoured it. And then that kind of fed the music taste, where you start listening to stuff that's more guitar oriented. You know, started watching Headbangers Ball and seeing Pantera, and that's what inspired us to tune from standard tuning to detuning, and we kind of did that and just never went back. But it was all because of 5 Minutes Alone and I'm Broken.
Okay, I got you. Hey, that's kind of where I started, but I would argue that my uncle gave me a guitar in about 86, 87, after seeing me watch so many guitar heroes on TV and like just kind of rocking out in my chair, and Guns N' Roses being one of them. He was like, I'm going to get you a guitar for your birthday. So he bought me like a little Fender combo amp and a guitar. And, you know, I broke that shit not too long after that, just thinking I was cool because I'm like running around the house. I don't even know how to play it. And I'm just like running into shit because I'm just trying to do the rock star thing. But over time, I went out and I bought my own guitar, and I learned how to play some Pantera, some Slayer stuff, some, you know, a couple Metallica riffs, and, you know, just ran from there. So yeah, we're on the same fucking path.
Yeah, I don't think that's different than a million other guitar players, right? Especially around that age group when we were coming up.
Yeah, I started a little earlier, so for me it started with like Van Halen and then George Lynch, and then from there I went crazy, and then I switched to bass because I read something with Joe Satriani talking about playing bass on one of his records, and I was like, I'll try this bass thing, and then ended up playing more bass than guitar for the past 20, 30 years at this point.
Bass is a unheralded component to what makes a band work.
Well, because either you have a fucking guitar player playing bass who doesn't even know how to actually play bass, or you have an actual bassist. It's one or the other.
I've been really lucky to play with, John, and God forbid, I think was one of the better bass players in metal, period. And he'll probably never get the credit he deserves because he was a real bass player. Had a great tone and very musical person, and big Cliff Burton fan and things like that. Big Geezer Butler fan, and that stuff really lent itself to the music. And now I play with Rob Trujillo, is one of the greatest rock bass players of all time. So I've like I said, I've been patting myself on the back.
So not to derail you, but you recently on the X-Man podcast had most of the members of God Forbid on. Where was John?
So what happened was I just had him on the show. So, and he was pretty quiet. I was like, I don't even know if he'd want to do it or if he'd be available. But I had each of these songs I was looking at, and I was like thinking, okay, who would be good to talk about each of these songs? And then the one episode became so long, I didn't want to have too many people because it would just be too long and people wouldn't listen to the end. And there was going to be 2 parts anyway. So I asked them to do the second episode to talk about the song from the last Godfrey album called Move On, and we just couldn't align our schedules.
Okay.
So, but
so he's not beefing with you.
It got back to me that he was annoyed, and then I felt absolutely horrible. And so I texted him and apologized as much as I could, but it was not intentional to like leave people out.
Right.
Definitely was not, because it wasn't like I said. When I did it, it wasn't just a God forbid thing. I talked to singer from my other band, Vegas Nerve. I talked to John from Bad Wolf, so it wasn't like I'm doing a bit. It just so happened that all the God forbid people ended up in one episode. So I just called it that, but it wasn't the original intent. It was more like, here are my favorite songs I want to talk about. A lot of them just happen to be God forbid songs.
I really enjoyed that, by the way. You going through like your whole catalog and picking a couple of different songs, and they weren't the popular songs either, which I thought was cool. Yeah,
because those are the ones you play on tour 50,000 times. You get kind of bored with them, and you it's like if you go on the Spotify top 10 of God forbid, it's fairly obvious what songs it's going to be. And those are songs we play at basically every show. If you saw us in the last few years, those are the songs we were pretty much going to play, with the exception maybe 1 or 2 on a particular show. But I always liked being an album band. We really tried to make complete albums that had a beginning, middle, and end, and every song kind of had its place and meaning. And a lot of times you wouldn't get to play those songs live as much as you'd like to. One of the things that sucked when Dallas left was there was all these songs of Earth's Blood we never got to play because his vocals were so dominant that it wasn't practical to play them live. And so I always liked that. I always liked the idea of, hey, let's play a whole album from beginning to end, or something where it's a pretty big thing where you can play an album from beginning to end and there's no like downsides. Like it's like energetic and people are pumped up all the way through. So, I always, and that's the thing, usually I gravitated towards the more obscure, weirder, experimental songs.
Yeah. Which that's why I thought it was cool, just because you weren't picking those usual songs. You were going deep, and that was pretty cool. And it's funny because talking about what you mentioned before about the business and how the business has changed, a lot of people are just doing EPs and singles and stuff like that, and you don't get as much with like the full album nowadays, just because that's the way the business is.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. I think it just depends what kind of band you are, what reacts with your fans, right? Like I think in many ways I agree with the idea that, if there's going to be 2 or 3 years between album, putting out an EP in between, a covers EP, putting out random singles with videos, I think it's smart. I just think it keeps people's attention, it keeps people connected to the band, and if people like you, they want to hear more songs, and if you have material, why not do that? But I do think the album as an idea isn't going anywhere anytime soon, because it marks an era, right? Like It's like, here's this era of this band. It's like a chapter, okay? And it's like, here's the artwork for the album, and that, if the artwork has a particular vibe visually, that can be iconic, and that it's like, that's when we play live, we're gonna have the backdrop's gonna be the album cover or something, or maybe the way the band dresses on that album is unique to that era. So it feels very autobiographical, right? When you think about the albums that you listen to when you were younger, you think about that entire album, what you were going through at that time, and what it signified. Because I always say this, anytime you ever see a band, right, it'll never be that again, right? Like you'll see Metallica in 1986, they're never going to play Master of Puppets like they did that night you saw them. Because they're never going to be the same people they were that night. And so it's this, evolving, growing thing. So, and when you think about, when you go back and you think about that, you think of Master of Puppets era Metallica, right? And then so the album creates an environment that you build a tour around, that you build big concepts around, and I don't think that's going to go anywhere.
So, to that point, I had that moment in my life where something I saw in the infancy stage or even the maturity stage came back later in my life, and both times I went to see it, it was just a big letdown, because in my mind I had built up that I was going to see what I saw in 97 and not what I received in 2000 and whatever it was, Snapcase. So, they had that.
Can I ask you a question? What was it, a sound thing or a visual thing or energy thing?
Energy. The energy was gone. Like, they were, for all intents and purposes, going through the motions on the older songs. The newer songs, they were still playing with, like, feeling, but, like, stuff off of Steps and Looking Glass Self and even Progressions Through Unlearning, it was like they were playing at halftime.
Yeah.
And, part of it's probably that they just can't keep that speed and make it through a whole set. It was just a disappointment for me.
Were they literally playing it slower?
Yes. Oh. Yes. So, like, the intro of Caboose is, like, pretty quick. I would say it's probably, like, 165, 170 BPM, and they probably played it, like, 140. So it's just, like, and I'm like, nope, out. I'm immediately out.
But that's I just think, I don't know if that's an energy thing or if that's just a odd perception of your songs. Of you're kind of misrepresenting the material if it's that crazy. Because I've seen bands, right, back in the day, right, you see a band where they play everything too fast, like it loses the groove, right?
Yeah, and I don't like that either.
So is that an energy thing? Or are they just literally just playing it too fast? Like, I don't think we should always equate tempo with energy. Even though that's how it's just sometimes the barometer of the band is off and someone needs to, like, hey guys, we're playing the song too slow. It doesn't sound good at this tempo. You know what I'm saying? That's just like orchestrating and everything and being like, it's like, that's why the conductor's there, right?
Yeah.
keep it all together.
But, yeah, I mean, I've had some disappointing moments, and the way that you put it, whereas in that it will never be what it was, is pretty damn clear.
It's a living and breathing thing, and that's why it's so special. That's why live shows are so special. It's like, hey, I got to see that band at that time, and it was really cool. And then this is what I loved about Metallica over the summer, putting out all those shows for free every Monday, and you get to see it. Get Metallica from 2014, Metallica from 1994, Metallica, and every era is great. It's not, there's no bad era. They're just different. And it's cool that they're all represented, and you get to feel the energy in a different way. And I get it that we'll I prefer this era, but I love it all. I love that they're just out there and they're still going, they're still strong, and it's hopeful and it's exciting, Can't wait.
Well, it's like a snapshot. It's like a snapshot, because I know I can remember I've seen Metallica at least 10 times, and I can remember most, if not all of them, just because each of them had a different energy to it. Some of them were really good. Some of them were kind of But, I remember, especially the first time I saw them, the first concert I ever went to was Metallica, Monsters of Rock, 1988. And it was right before Justice came out, and they were just starting to blow up completely. And it's like, you never forget it. We've talked about it on the podcast a few times, just because it was so crazy just to witness it. It was like Kingdom Come, and then Metallica, and then it was Doc and the Scorpions and Van Halen, and Metallica played at like 4 in the afternoon, and then people just left a stadium show.
Just like this.
Beat the traffic.
Back then it was $35. Now, it would be over $100. But, like, imagine somebody paying $100-something to go to a stadium show and bounce after the second band. But that's what it was, because they were getting that big.
I did that at one point, because when Slipknot was blowing up, they went on tour with Machine Head, and I actually went just to see Machine Head, and I left, because I'm just not really a Slipknot fan. Like, more power to them as a band. It's
But
just
the funny thing is, that's not the story of that tour. The story of that tour was Slipknot, halfway through the tour, or maybe the beginning of the tour, was the biggest band on the tour, and they were playing second. And so the show I went to in New York, I was walking into the venue, and I missed Slipknot, and people were leaving after a second band on the bill. That's rare. That's a rare thing.
Was that
very
Roseland?
similar? Yeah, but very similar situation, right? Where they were ascending so quickly from the time they booked the tour, maybe 6 months earlier, to the time it happens. They, and after that, I don't think they ever opened for anyone ever again.
Yeah,
except on some like one-offs or something.
Yeah, but there's no reason for them to open for anybody.
Well, they had shows booked with Metallica that were going to open up in Australia, but that got canceled because of the pandemic, which would be amazing.
Yeah,
so speaking of the pandemic, I know that this year is 20 years since Determination came out.
Yeah.
If there had been no pandemic, would there maybe been a little something to commemorate it?
There's going to be a vinyl is coming.
Okay.
Nice.
And it's so we've been doing some work behind the scenes to make that happen. I don't know the exact date. Hopefully it'll come out around the release date, which I want to say the album came out in April of 2001. And people have been asking us about, we're doing a show, we're doing a reunion. I mean, the real issue with a God forbid anything live show is, I'm in Bad Wolves, which I don't think people really understand how much bigger Bad Wolves is than God forbid ever was. Like, it's just a completely different.
I realize.
Yeah, it's just a completely different world, and that, when we say it's a full-time job, it really is all encompassing. And if the pandemic didn't happen, I had tours booked every quarter of 2020. We were going to be working out. And then when we're not on tours, the band is almost always writing. And then we started a Patreon page, or creating content for that. And you're doing social media. It's a real comprehensive approach to being in bands. And then all the other stuff I do. But because there's no concerts happening right now anyway, right? I think that makes anything like this difficult to put together. And it would have to, if I was going to do it, it would have to exist around another band's really busy schedule. Then you get the fact that Byron lives in Texas and has a kid and is married, and John is over here and he's married and has a kid, and there's situations with my brother where it's who knows where that's at, and there's just a lot of moving parts. So it's really something that the timing would have to be right, and everyone would have to be logistically be hard to pull off, because it's like, how do you rehearse if everyone's on all different parts of the country, right?
Right.
So that's a real investment of time, and finding rehearsal places, or make sure you do this, or if one person is kind of not as up to snuff with the playing, and these are all things that if anything like that would happen, it'd have to be done right. But it's not like we're in a situation where professionally it's something that we could hang our hat on, like, we're going to do this and make a bunch of money so we can invest all this time. It's really kind of a question mark. Well, yeah, I mean, but listen, we ain't gonna play for free. And there would have to be worth people's time, and I think it would, but I think it's the love of it, but more of just connecting as human beings, as being the kind of family unit that we always were. That's the number one thing. Second thing is giving back to the people that supported the band. We never got to do a final tour or a final show or anything like that. So I think giving people that experience, I think, would be cool. But like I said, I think logistically it's a lot harder than people think. That it's just like, just go play a show. And it's like, well, one, no one's doing shows. Let's have some shows before. And then Battle's going to a situation where we split with a singer, so we're figuring that out, having to finish an album. Like, I have another band, Vegas Nerve, where I was getting ready to try and make a new album with that band, and then all the Bad Wolves should happen. And I was like, now I have to go completely back to Bad Wolves world and finish that record and possibly plan the rest of our year with touring and all that stuff. So it kind of like things are evolving in real time right now, and you have to kind of react to that, and you have to prioritize. And Bad Wolves is my main band.
Well, it should be your main band because it's the band that gets you paid. It's a
little
thing you're
more
focused on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little more than just punching a clock. You know, it's a career, and it's also the opportunity is so big. You know, we have really the opportunity to ascend to the highest levels that the genre we're in affords, and if you don't go 100% and give it your all, then you probably won't make it. You know, you have to. The people at the top are the hardest working people, you know, and they're the ones that know that, like, you know, you just don't get many of these opportunities. So we'll see what will happen. And I'm a very ambitious person, and I really want to approach this challenge with all my effort.
So I don't want to dig into what happened with Tommy leaving the band. But have you guys had tryouts, or like what's going on? Are you guys like in the process of making the next move?
Yeah, I mean, our first step, like, we didn't really open it up to the public. I mean, if people knew us and they reached out, we consider them, or if we had people we thought of, we'd reach out. But everything's been behind the scenes for the most part. We've just been getting recordings, you know, been listening to people. And then now we're about to go in our next phase, which is like in-person auditions. So that's happening this week.
Cool.
So hopefully we'll have a decision made, you know, within the next, you know, hopefully by the end of the month. That's the hope. But we have some really great candidates, and it's encouraging, and it's exciting, and it's scary, and it's a lot of work, you know, just going back and forth, because, you know, this is very similar to like casting a movie, right? Like,
right.
You know, you hear about all these, like, Back to the Future, right? They casted Eric Stoltz as Marty McFly, and they filmed.
I want to see that footage. I absolutely.
It's on the. I think all the.
Yeah, it's around.
Is it on? I haven't gone to look.
It's right on YouTube too. But
yeah, there's probably. I'm pretty sure there's a couple of clips on YouTube.
And I want to see special features on. I want to see it all. I want to see whatever they have. I want a fucking full print.
There's not much. I don't even think he was there for a week.
Okay. No, it was a little longer than that. But they basically were in it, and they were like, it just isn't right. They felt like he wasn't nailing the comedic tone of the film. And then same thing happened with Aragorn in Lord of the Rings. They casted someone else, started filming, and they were just like, something's not right here. So that's
same thing with Game of Thrones. They did a pilot, and they sacked half the cast from the pilot. That pilot, I don't know if it exists anywhere.
Oh, there's another pilot.
There was one pilot that had a bunch of different actors and actresses in it. They basically redid it, and that was the cast that went on.
Wow. But the general point is that that's what you don't want to happen. You don't want to pick the wrong person, and all of a sudden you're like, is this the right person? Did we screw up? And then, you know, maybe we were halfway through a track an album, and then it's like, hey, let's, you know, so it's
sack this one, start over again.
Yeah, this is a decision that will affect our lives and the band for forever. So you have to really be sure, and you have to really be thorough, and you have to be open-minded, and you have to field a variety of opinions and understand who that person is kind of through and through, because someone you're going to have to live with and share business with. And yeah, so it's pretty big, and there are big shoes to fill. And yeah, so there's a lot of pressure there.
And then you'll get the haters.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, but here's the thing. That's it's the cost of doing business. Anytime you change a member of a band that's that big, people, you know, some people are going to be out. There's like that's why they were there, and now they're like, well, that the reason why I was here doesn't exist anymore, so I'm going to move on. And I think a lot of that's understandable. It's easy for me to sit here and say you shouldn't take it personally, but they are, in many of these criticisms, they are personal attacks. But you have to mentally, emotionally fortify yourself to withstand that, because it's never going to go away. And
of course,
I've gone out of my way to reach out and consult with bands that have had singer switches and survived and thrived. Yeah, actually, I called Adam D and left a voiceover. He was moving, so he just texted me back this week. I was like, oh, he can get back to me, so I'm gonna hit him up and just to basically understand what to do. And we're really good friends with the band 3 Days Grace, who was a really big band who split their singer years ago. And the thing they all told, they're just the nicest guys. They're Canadian, so they probably can't help it. But they all offered their support and yeah, they're from Ontario, so they got a little bit of that. But they all said the same thing, and they were just like, don't engage the haters. People are always going to come at you. Just ignore it and just focus on the positive. And it's a hard thing to do because you want to defend yourself, and the truth is people don't know the real story.
Of course.
And they may never know the real story. We do. So when things are, I think the thing you really want to do is defend yourself where you feel like you've been mischaracterized, that they're saying something that just isn't true, but you can't divulge the real truth of it. But that takes strength and discipline and just, it's like will of spirit to and I really, and listen, I'm not comparing myself to these people, but I really think about, the peaceful warriors of the past, be it a MLK or a Gandhi, this idea that you get attacked, but then you don't react, right? That's the hardest thing to do. It's easy to react, right? It's easy to take the bait from the trolls. It's hard to ignore it and forge through. But the more I focus and the band focuses on the positive in the work that we're doing, the easier it gets, because then you just it kind of just washes off you. And it doesn't mean it doesn't affect you, because it's real shit. It's tough to get rejected by the people that are supposed to be your fans, right? But if they were fans of one person and don't care about us, do you really want them as your fans? Probably not, right? Yeah. But guess what? There's more fans to be made, right? There's all kinds of people who maybe were not open to liking the band that might be open now. And there's a lot of possibility out there, and we have a great framework to build from.
I will say, though, I have seen a few of your replies to the most epic haters, and I have been in tears.
That's what I was thinking of when I mentioned it. The haters arrived.
Fine. That was within the first 2 days, and that was the last. That
was your break from going back at them. You just pulled back from it.
Well, my thing is me. I address things with humor. And I'm from Jersey. We know how to diss each other.
Yeah, I mean,
don't come at the king. We'll talk about your pants. We'll talk about your mama. We'll talk about your haircut. Don't come at me. I will I will eviscerate you comedically when it comes to dissing. But I think that was in the heat of it, and there's a defensive mode that you have that's natural, and it's okay. But that's what they want. They want to provoke you. They want to feel important by having someone who is important acknowledge them. Because if there's 100 comments and 99 are positive, one is negative, our tendency is to focus on the negative one, right? If you play a show and there's 300 people in the show and 299 love it, and there's that one guy folding his arms looking at you cross-eyed, you're like, why isn't that guy looking at me? Right? We're wired that way. And that's not a healthy thing. We have to learn to focus on the positive, not worry about the negative person. And the truth is, though, that stuff, it will fade. And it's resilience. Resilience is something that you develop and cultivate over long periods of time. And it's not happen overnight. And this stuff is character building, I think.
I can feel that. I will tell you I struggle with that, but I've tried to be better just in general about hearing people say shit about me and just letting it go. because there is nothing actually to be gained at going back at them.
It's endless. Like, and the truth is, listen, the more successful you are, the more haters you're going to get, especially in the internet era.
Oh, yeah.
And it speaks to our own personal levels of security or insecurity, right? So more than likely, the less secure you are, the more it will piss you off because you're actually worried that they might actually be saying something that's true, right? I remember this happening when I filled in for Lamb of God for Mark Morton. I was, it was the most nervous I've ever been in my life. I'm going to go do a tour at Metallica, and I have to play fucking Mark Morton solos and their riffs. And literally, when I took the gig, I didn't know if I could do it. I didn't know if I was good enough. And I was in there, trying to practice these songs, and someone sent me a MySpace message, and they were just like, you suck, you're going to fail, you're going to go out there and you're going to blow it. And
you're just it's in your head. It's clanging around.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was having my own doubts about being able to do the job, right? But then when I went and did the gig, it was the most nervous I've ever been in my life. And then I got out there, and then I did it, and I was good. And then I was like, it was a real revelation moment about, like, that guy. You might as well just been a metaphor for doubt, for self-doubt, right? And I'll say there's like an angel and a devil on each one of our shoulders. And I'm not talking about morality. I'm talking about the voice of optimism versus pessimism, right? You are a winner. You're a loser. You can do this. You can't do this. You're gonna win. You're gonna succeed. You're gonna fail. And I say they're both liars, right? Because none of them can tell the future, right? No one knows what's gonna happen. They're both liars. But I'm like, but if you only listen to the positive one, that motivates you. It gets you out of bed in the morning. It makes you work harder. It keeps you. It's like the engine that fuels it is just believing yourself in the face of difficult circumstances. So it's neither one. Like, some people will say, a lot of people who are pessimists will tell you, well, I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist, right? But that is a reflection of their pessimism. Is that they
Are you talking about me? Are you trying to eviscerate me on my own show?
No, I'm not trying to eviscerate anyone. If you feel that way, I'm trying to help you. It's unfortunately, a lot of people wear cynicism as a badge of honor. Like, I keep it real, like, that's the world is fucked up and I'm just letting people know. I'm like, well, yeah, but no, like, I feel like so much of our perspective is projection, right? So if you see a terrible, hateful, ugly world, you're gonna go see a terrible, hateful, ugly world. And we create filters to see the things we want to see.
Now, I'll accept that. But
thank you. You're like the referee.
But what about when you do actually see the terrible, hateful shit that is going on, to not call it out for what it is that ignoring the reality?
No, well, I just think it depends what context, what we're talking about. Are we talking about having a conversation about a particular, like, let's say we were talking about, race, modern racism or discrimination, right? And we're having a conversation about that, right? Okay, are we just having a conversation with you? Are we at a protest and we're making a point? Are we lobbying our politicians? In which context is it relevant to talk about realities that are just messed up, right? So yes, do I think we need to be sober and realistic and call it for what it is, right? Yes, but I think in many instances, usually there's a 360 degree version of that maybe. So I only want to talk about this little piece of the pie, but I want to ignore this other piece of the pie because it doesn't help my argument, right? We all become lawyers where we're just trying to win an argument instead of saying, okay, it's a little this, a little bit of that, but it doesn't mean this isn't real. But it also means there's other information there that paints a bigger picture that is more murkier than my narrative. And that's the thing, is I think we're very much into narratives, that human beings comprehend reality through stories, and stories have heroes and villains and arcs and drama. But that's because that's how we make sense of the world. The world is chaotic, and for humans to understand it, and how we've evolved is through storytelling.
Okay.
Yeah, I could see what you're saying. And that goes to the conversation that you had on your podcast recently, talking about Phil from All That Remains and the news channels and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I love Phil. I just think he's, and I would tell anything I'll tell you, I would tell him to his face or on Twitter, is that I think he's connected to hyperbole. Like, he really gets something out of saying things that are probably a little more wild than he really even believes, because it tracks well. It gets likes and retweets, and it like, no one is excited. No one gets turned on by nuance. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
there's no serotonin.
It's like nuance. All Trump supporters are Nazis. You know, simple. Something you could put on a T-shirt, right? Just good team, bad team, white team, black team, whatever. You know, and when you get into a battle, what people really don't like, when you're like hardcore, I'm on this side, right? The tribalism. They really get pissed off when you humanize the people you disagree with, right? Because it's like, well, if they're humans, I have to think about them as complete people with benefits and flaws, and that's a difficult thing for understanding. I always try and empathize with the people I disagree with, right? Like, I was talking about QAnon on Twitter a little bit.
Oh no!
And was saying, like, I think a big reason why that movement happened is because of the pandemic, where everyone was separated and not able to socialize the way we normally do. And this like world-breaking thing happened where people lost jobs and loved ones and going to shows and going all this stuff. And what they found in QAnon was a community, was something to be a part of.
Yeah.
And that's just a very naturally human thing, that even if I disagree with that and everything that they are, that it's basically a cult, but it's just like every other cult. Every documentary you watch about a cult, it was just a group of kind of lost people who found somewhere that they felt a part of something bigger than themselves, and they felt loved and they felt accepted. And that is never going to go away as long as there's human beings.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And we talked about it on the podcast recently. The other part of it, too, is just what you mentioned about the pandemic. It's like they've kind of become isolated in their own little bubble, and it just feeds these theories. It's like they hear something and they think maybe it's crazy, but then they're surrounded. Since a lot of people are stuck at home, their only outlet is social media, but they're in their bubble with just people who are in the same mindset, and they're telling you that's not crazy. And then it just builds and builds and becomes more and more weirdness, is, I guess, the best way to put it.
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely religious.
They're in their own bubble.
It's like any very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Zealotry, right? Like anything that's just very, very extreme.
Yeah.
In terms of, it's like, this is what we believe, this is the reality, and we're ready to die for this shit, right? Like every, like I actually came up with a new phrase, and maybe this exists somewhere else, or someone else coined this, but it was moral supremacy, right? Like we think about terms like, oh, white supremacy. I'm like, no, because what they'll call like woke culture, where the idea is like that affliction is actually moral supremacy, right? It's that I feel like me and the people on my team are morally superior to the people we're against.
Right.
And the problem with that is that even if you're right, it's a way of really dividing things into good, evil. I'm fighting evil. And when you're fighting evil, you can justify any act, right? So like a suicide bomber thinks they're fighting evil, right? They're completely righteous in their actions. They think they're doing God's work and they're helping the world. And same thing with these QAnon people. They're like, well, we're trying to save the children, right? If you're trying to save kids, who wouldn't you kill? What building wouldn't you bomb? What politician wouldn't you advocate being harmed because you're trying to save the kids? There's nothing. It's the ultimate, like, get out of jail free card, because you feel righteous in your actions. So it becomes the ends justify the means.
Right.
So that's
And
really dangerous.
Who could possibly be against that?
But that's the same, but if you take that and go look at it from a leftist standpoint, you go, oh, punch a Nazi. And it's like, so, and it devolves you from principle, because if your principle is I'm for nonviolence, then you get away from your own principle. It's like, well, violence is effective as long as I'm morally superior to the person I'm punching, because then they deserve it, right? And you get into this like judge, jury, executioner thing where you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, and it goes in a lot of different ways, but I think it's a very dangerous thing, to kind of new plateau in terms of the way we see things. But everyone thinks they're on the moral side and that the people they disagree with is immoral.
Well,
I don't feel personally bad about disagreeing with Nazism, though. But I also...
I didn't say disagreeing with it. I'm saying that your principle either, like, you can't say, well, I'm against violence, but like either you are or you're not.
Right.
So it's very cut and dry. Like some people say, well, I'm against violence except for self-defense, right? Now that's a pretty good principle, but punch a Nazi is not self-defense. It's I'm going to use violence to make a political point.
Well, it depends on the aggression of the Nazi.
Well, but some people would argue that words are violence, or attitudes are violence, or the prospective outcomes of fascism will be violent, so we have to use violence to thwart it, right? And then you get into trying to preempt something, and that gets. And listen, I'm not a big fan of slippery slopes, but it is something that I think has created the hyper polarized environment that we're in, is this idea of tribal moral superiority and people feeling that they're 100% in the right and the people they disagree with is 100% in the wrong. And if you were really being fair about it, you realize almost everyone has a point. Doesn't mean they're right? But something can be 51% right and 49% wrong. Doesn't mean it's all wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just some things outweigh the other thing a little more, and people don't look at it that way. It's like, no, you have to be 100% with me, and it's just it's a really great way for societies to implode.
So I got a question for you. You grew up going to shows in New Jersey, being part of the New Jersey scene, and we, along with Philadelphia and New York, pretty much wiped all the Nazis, mostly, from coming to shows.
Yeah.
By violence.
Yeah.
I mean,
but then again, here's the thing: like the dudes that were doing that, would we say that their life philosophy was living by nonviolence? No, they were kind of violent people. Do you know what I'm saying? What I'm saying, I'm not talking about in the sense of, the hardcore scene was like prison, man. Come on, man. That shit, that shit was real. I mean, the whole point of it was to kind of express ourselves through some form of consensual violence, right? That's what a mosh pit is. It's consensual violence. Which is okay.
Not as consensual as you wanted it to be. But.
Yeah, no. I mean, and just like a professional boxing match is consensual violence, right? We're okay with violence as long as both parties are on board with it, and we say, hey, we know what we're getting into, and there's regulations around that. And I'm not. And by the way, when I was younger, I probably is a self-described what's the word I'm looking for? Someone who's a pacifist. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that pacifism, from a fundamentalist standpoint, is not practical, right? Because some big dude wants to go punch a little kid in the face. How do you stop the big dude, right? You stop that, man. You don't do that, right? You get nice. You get your damn hands off of her. Right? So there's limitations of speech being able to. So in a violent world, right? In a sense, the lowest common denominator gets to define the ground rules. And so, unfortunately, until we're evolved past violence as a general tenet of how we engage in the world, then we're forced to use violence in kind of a civilized way, right? Which is to incapacitate violent people or jail violent people or whatever. But what I'm saying is, if your political movement is, well, we're anti-war and we're anti these people being violent, and all, like, it's like I said, it's the difference between, old school Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, right? Old school Malcolm X, by any means necessary. They did not ascribe to nonviolence. They're like, well, if shit has to go down, it'll go down. Where Martin Luther King was like, no, we can't, no, turn the other cheek. We don't get in that. But people thought, like, if you were in the Nation of Islam, your whole thing was, well, they only do that because they're Uncle Toms, right? They're soft. They're just playing to the white man, right? But what they didn't realize, like, no, it's a tactic. It's that if I go about my business and don't do violence, and then they sick dogs on us, and then they beat us, and then they put the hoses on us, then we look like the victims. It's a tactic to get some public support. It's not weak. It's a strategy, right? And anytime you engage, right, it's the same thing with any protest movement, like over the summer, where I think most of the violence and looting probably had very, very little to do with the actual protest, right? It was
100%.
People were taking it. It was like random people just showing up and taking advantage of chaos, right? So, but even if I don't think it was mainly the protesters' fault, it makes them look bad.
Yeah,
absolutely does.
They can't say that, well, we just came there and that's what happened. I think, and this is unfortunate, I think when you have movements that don't have definitive leaders, right? It wasn't like there's one, it was all naturally organic things that happened around the country.
Well, we've talked about that a bunch of times, is that there's a lack of leadership around.
Which, by the way, to some degree, I think is good, because I think it shows that it's organic. You can't say, whereas like the insurrection, you'd be like, well, yeah, there's one guy at the top who gave his marching orders, and people, right. It was very easy to trace the roots of certain things. But the thing is, if you want trying to initiate social reform, the best way to do it is nonviolently, because if you're nonviolent and the police come and whoop your ass, then you will get the people on your side, because if they see that you're doing all the right things and they're being dicks. So it's a strategy, and that's the whole point. But the point isn't just like, no, we don't want to hit people because we're pussies. It's like, no, it's a form of getting your way. It's like, that's how you work the system. But as soon as something goes bad, then the people who don't want to be on your side, what do they get? Look at those animals. Look at those people. Look, you see how they do, right? Then all of a sudden they can't, then they want to demonize you, So
which is exactly what was happening with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, but listen, the same people say the same shit after any riot, unless it's like some frat boys rioting after their college football team wins a game. Then you never hear nothing. But
at all,
if it's a certain kind of people rioting or looting or property destruction, it's the same argument. And I would say is, who are the motherfuckers that are advocating for looting and rioting? And if you are, I'm sorry, you're an idiot. You're just wrong. It's never a good idea. Doesn't mean it's like, I look at it as more like a natural reaction to, like, if you just put your foot on people's neck for so long, there will be a reaction, right? If they're poor, if they're disenfranchised, if they feel ignored, that will manifest itself. It's, the things that happened over the summer, and even to a degree, the insurrection and a lot of that stuff is related to a society that is showing its weaknesses, and its cracks. Anyway, hopefully we didn't go down too deep.
No, it's fine. I would argue that the people that were involved with the insurrection, it's merely a fact of perception for them instead of reality. They perceive that they're losing control of their status or the idea of their status, or just, that America is no longer great, etc. And it's actually not true, but they've been led to believe that it's not true. So I feel like it's a slightly different argument for them than necessarily for Black Lives Matter, which I don't think it's a perception. It's much more a reality.
Well,
at least for me.
But in a sense, I agree with you and disagree with you, because I think you're right, but I do think the response of the summer was in response to one guy dying, right? And how he died.
I don't think it was a response to just one guy dying.
It was a build-up. It was a build-up.
It was definitely a build-up.
But Eric Garner, the same thing happened, right? Basically. But there wasn't any things right. It was a build-up, but I think it had everything to do with when it happened during the pandemic. But the world wasn't any different. America wasn't any different the day before George Floyd got killed, the day after. There wasn't more racism, right?
No, absolutely.
And it's not like the numbers. Like, I think that, it were so crazy, right? That was like, I think it is emotional. And I think it also is a way of seeing things. Like, we have a different way of kind of empathizing, right? Like, if we found out, 100 black people got killed in a bombing, right? But you didn't see it. You just heard about it, right? Do you empathize the same way as opposed to seeing one person die in a way that you feel like connected to that? I think it still is emotional, and it is saying, okay, let's say people are racist, right? Or cops are racist, or that cop was racist. How do you legislate that out of people, right? Like, what law can that out? But that's my point, is that I think I think they're both emotional, and they're both based on a narrative. It's just a matter of, what is more valid and what is less valid. How does a particular protest movement create a change that we think will actually change the world in general, or change America in general? Like, to me, when I look at that, I say we should be mad if the police kill anyone unjustly.
Well, we should be.
You know what I'm saying? But and by the way, and I think that's a great conservative argument, right? Because, like, the libertarians, right, they're all about don't tread on me and leave me to myself. Like, that's a way to appeal to everyone. But in a sense, even though if you look at the numbers, it's something like per capita, black people are 2.5 more times likely to be killed by the police. And then all the statistics back up how vastly more they're likely to be pulled over and sentenced harsher, right? There's all these things that exist. But the way to actually deal with that is from the top down, right? It's like thinking we're going to stop police violence against people by dealing directly with police is like thinking we'll get rid of drugs by stopping all the corner dealers, right? It's like, no, there's a system that created an environment for things like that to happen. But anyway, like, we can go on this all day, but I think they are related, and I think one has more validity than others, and sometimes it's not necessarily about validity. I just get into really, like, tactics and the actual politics of it, because I think politics are tedious, boring, it's a lot of petitioning and like city council meetings. And it's like, but people don't want to do it. People want to, like, go out, shout a phrase, have some signs, and then, like, we're creating a revolution. But it's like, well, there's, believe it,
there's a couple more steps to it.
Yeah. It's a lot. And I think I just try and be as, like, I can look at that movement and feel much more connected to that on a visceral level, on a historical level. But like I said, the way I try to do is, even those fucking insurrectionists, or I think a lot of terrible, terrible individuals there, I always try and say, okay, how did that happen? Those people were, like, gettable, right? They were able to be manipulated in a way, and that's unfortunate. We need to figure out all that stuff, But I also don't think it's actually fair to even compare the two things. I think it's apples versus oranges in many ways.
Well, we've talked about on here many times that a lot of the problem isn't the government. The problem is that a lot of people are just so easy to get, like you said, that they're manipulated by social media and they're just willing to give up control. They give up the wheel. Tell me who to vote for. Tell me what to listen to. Tell me what to do. And they just want to be manipulated. And that's where part of the problem comes from.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, though, it's funny because people always talk about, man, the media, man. Let me talk about the media. The media is crazy. And people, they'll say that they don't even know what they're saying. I'm like, what's the media? And what they really mean is CNN. That's the thing. The media is a million different things in this day and age. And the truth is, CNN's part of it, Fox News, all that stuff is part of it. But the real problem is demagoguery, right? And a lot of that exists outside of those realms in things like podcasts, things like YouTube, where it's one individual who's pissed off all the time. And they tell you why. Basically, what they do is they tell you why life isn't fair, why you getting screwed over every day, and then they tell you who the enemies are. And that happens on both sides. And so you get a group of people that every time there's an election, they literally think the world's going to end. That because all these people are like, yo, if you don't vote for this, Trump said it on January 6th. If you don't do this, it will be, we're not going to have a country.
Right. If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Right. And that is at its heart hyperbole. But for those people, it's not. It's a statement of fact. And it's the same thing. It's like if the Republicans pass this tax break, then the country's gonna implode. It's just like, no, it's just a dumbass tax break that a lot of people are gonna get rich off of, and it ultimately will not be good for the country. But it's not what you're saying it's gonna be. So people get wrapped up in every issue, and here's the enemies, and that's why. And that's, to me, a big problem because that stuff tracks. People want to know.
Oh, yeah.
It was like, get people angry and then tell them who to be angry at. Right. And that is everyone on board. There's very little people going, hey, guys, relax, I know you don't like Mitch McConnell, but he's an all right. I don't like his policy, but there's none of that. There's like, yo, that guy is Dr. Evil.
I mean, technically is Dr. Evil. But
yeah. I agree. I'm with you, but what I'm saying is, even if there was someone like that, it just doesn't really. There's very little of even humanizing our politicians, right? They're either Dr. Evil or they're Captain Marvel, right? There's no in between.
Right. No, I don't disagree with you, but I think part of it also is just if people no longer have independent thought and are just not using their brains anymore and are just letting themselves be spoon-fed shit instead of actually
Let me ask you a question. When were people thinking independently? What era was this?
I mean,
was there some golden era of like the Enlightenment? We gotta go back 500 years.
What's funny now is that now you got the internet and there's more information out there, but in the end, it's done the opposite, and people are just more likely to listen to just crazy shit.
Well, what I have to say about it is, let's take it back to before the internet. We all exist. The three of us on this specific call right now all existed pre-internet, and had friends and conversations that did not exist on this machine that we're all sucked into at this point. When you had a crazy idea, you could talk to your neighbor, or you could talk to like one or two friends. I have a crazy idea right now, and I can talk to thousands or hundreds of thousands of people in one swift hashtag.
Well, not only that, you can, the crazy people can have a Reddit page.
Right, they can have a whole
or a 4chan collection where they can convene, and where all of a sudden your community is not your neighbor, it's some guy in Taiwan and some lady in Michigan, right. And the spread
is just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like the idea of like, the reason why we use that word viral, that viral spread of ideas. And I don't think there's any advancement or devolution of independent thought. I think there's nothing stopping anyone from thinking independently except themselves. And I can't say there's any more than there was or less than there was. You go back to America 50 years ago, 100 years ago. I think people were more conformists. They were more like, hey, this is what we do. It was more of a we attitude. Even the idea of the individuality and doing what you wanted to do, that's a total like baby boomer thing that didn't even start happening until the 80s and 70s. So I think the problem is the fallacy, right? Is that everyone thinks they're thinking for themselves, right? So actually what people do is everyone wants to think they're a revolutionary, that they're like, man, the systems has got all you people down, but me, I've outsmarted it. So all the QAnon people, to a certain degree, are they the most independent thinkers because they won't believe the official story? Like if like something happens, right? Like if Jeffrey Epstein gets killed, kills himself in jail, and if you go, yeah, man, he probably killed himself in jail, people will think you're crazy for believing the official story now. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's all perception. Everyone is so cynical. They think you're a sap if you just believe, like if you like read the New York Times, they're like, oh, it looks like there was a bombing in Syria today. It's like, oh, you believe that? Yeah, sheeple. So everyone thinks they want to feel like they're outsmarting this thing because they've been, and partially this is true, but they think that they're being lied to all the time. They don't trust the government. They don't trust universities. They don't trust doctors. They don't trust scientists. They don't trust the police. They don't trust the army. They don't trust, no one trusts anyone anymore. So there's like, there's some demagogue on some YouTube channel that'll say, well, you know what? I'll tell you how you're being lied to, and I'll tell you who's lying to you, and I'll tell you why they're doing it, and then boom. But that person thinks they're being an independent thinker.
That's the way it works. That's just the way it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's kind of it's like a fetish for awakening, right? There's a reason why they use the term red pilled, right? It's this idea that, I'm going to subvert my natural reality and I'm going to awaken to the real truth, that everything up till now has been some facade, and that everyone is connected to that. So you get to see all these ideas being reappropriated, whether it's the Matrix or it's Alice in Wonderland or what's the other one that people always, things like Fight Club or things like this. Like, oh man, you really, and that's why all the phraseology is the same. Woke, red pill, like this, It's all, but it's the same idea. It's like, I'm aware, I got it figured out, man. I woke up, brother. You still asleep, and it's, all sides of that, because there's a sanctimony to it, because they have to be in a club, right? Because if everyone was red pilled, if everyone was woke, right, you wouldn't be special anymore. So they have to find a new thing where they can be special.
Well, I mean, that's the way everything works, is that everybody's looking for the new thing to be on top of, instead of just existing.
Yeah. I mean, I get the natural inclination to want to do that, but I think that's the thing that defines modern people trying to navigate the world, because I think so much of it is tribal, so much of it is peer pressure. But I think truly thinking independently is kind of being able to look at the people directly around you, the culture that you see. Oh, all my friends kind of like me. I live in a city. I'm of a certain demographic. People, I'm around musicians and stuff, and we tend to lean a certain way. But you have to challenge that just so that you don't get sucked into just doing what everyone else does. And vice versa, if there's a group of people I disagree with and they come from a different culture, I can't also discount everything they're saying just because they're with the other people. And I think that's the ultimate form of independence is not falling into these tribal archetypes that are so common now. That I have friends who are very, very leftist, where it's like, they're but leftist in a cultural sense, where they're like, well, I unfriended those people, and I only hang with these people. I'm like, well, now you're in an echo chamber. Good for you. Now you only get to. I leave all that shit up on Facebook, all the crazy shit. I'm like, it's fine, because I can hear it, and I just don't pay attention to it. If it's some stupid shit, it's Facebook. Whatever, it is what it is. But people are not used to that. They think it's like Netflix, right? You can just watch what I want when I want. I can block you. Boom, you're blocked. You just create
I'm going to tell you right now, I've blocked a lot of people over the course of the last year. And the reason why it's more of a personal protection thing, because not that I need you to agree with me, but if I feel like you're spouting off racist shit and there's no way for me to not even get through to you, but understand your viewpoint in a way that isn't offensive to me, when I'm on the internet and I'm scrolling, I'm here for a good time. I'm not here to be arguing with people that right, but yeah, exactly. And so it's like sometimes I just gotta remove people because most of these people aren't even my friends anyway. Yeah. They're like people that you just happen to know because you met them at a show, or they're friends of a friend. And if I'm looking at you and I don't really personally know you, and B, you're talking some wild shit, you're out, because I don't have time for that.
Yeah. Well, I look at it like microdosing, right? So poison, that is, not not psychedelics. So on Facebook, I don't talk politics. I stopped. And thankfully, the algorithm rewarded me by not showing me a lot of people's politics. But because I know too many of those people, I was like, this is not a healthy place, because the things are not solved. It's not a great mechanism for actually sharing ideas. People just argue, and it's kind of pointless. So I stopped talking around there. Twitter I do because it feels communal. It's a lot more people I don't know. Everyone's kind of involved. All the important people are there. But I purposefully, after the 2016 election, I was like, you know what? I'm in my own bubble. I need to follow more people I disagree with. And yeah, it is more frustrating. It's more infuriating. You get triggered, quote unquote, more, and you want to respond, or they say something crazy. But like I said, it's like microdosing. You have to. The reason why is that so I'm not in the dark about a different perspective, that I hear it enough so I have a fully formed perception of how I see something. And it's the Rorschach test, right? 100 people see the same event, and there's 100 different reactions. So it's important that even if I don't agree with that person, that I know how that viewpoint is absorbing it. And you'll see it. It'll be completely opposite. It'll blow your mind. But if you never see it, and you finally do, it'll feel like, you're seeing. Yeah. So it's important for me to get a fully formed version of things from people. And like I said, a lot of it is demagoguery. A lot of it is bad faith attacks. But I do feel that it has made me more informed, more empathetic, and just it will basically make you a less naive person. And you just go, okay, yeah, these are for certain groups, because they're in their own bubbles, and these people in their own bubbles. So and I just think that's a bad way to be. Like I want to know what people are thinking, even if I disagree with them. Yeah, I'm not going to follow some crazy Klansman or something saying some
don't lie.
Ethnic Klansman shit. But there definitely are people that think it's worth it to. And there's also people who I disagree with politically who are reasonable, right? Who just and I'll agree. I'm like, I agree with that. I disagree with that. And you can.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with people I disagree with. It's literally just like the spouting of racism is what will get me to turn off from someone, because I'm at 40, almost 45. I know how it goes. And I also understand racism because I was introduced to it at 2.5, 3 years old. So I've been fighting this fight for 40 some years. There's at some point I need to be able to extract myself from that because I know how it goes. Like, I'm not surprised when I find out somebody's racist. Like that country star that dropped the N-bomb and everybody's freaking out on the internet. I'm like, how are you surprised by this? He's a white country star. This is what is expected. I'm not surprised by this by any stretch, and I move on with my life. Like,
the least surprising part of that was that his sales went up.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. I think racism, those people, and this is, let's go back to the Rorschach test. Almost no one thinks they're racist, right? So your perception of that, even that guy, Keith, what was his name? Morgan Wallen. You know, to me, racial slurs are not the barometer for racism because it's just words. Anyone can say anything, right? Racism's in the heart. I'm not a mind reader. I can absorb certain things. And I think that conversation around that is really muddled because if you perceive someone as being racist, right, and they don't perceive themselves as being racist, everything in that chasm is the problem, right? It's a failure of people to commonly understand each other. And the thing is, the way I go with it, it's not like there's not racist people over here and non-racist people over here. Everyone's racist. No, everyone's racist. You racist, I'm racist. That's the problem. That's the problem with this is motherfuckers their starting point is I'm not racist. Yes, you too, motherfucker. Everyone's racist. Just depends. You know why? Because it's natural human shit. All right. It's like dudes, like, you know, we see a girl walk around and you're like looking at her butt. All right. Is that the right thing to do? No, being creepers, but we do it because it's natural. Because we like butts. All right. We're animals and we're idiots. Okay. And racism is the same way. Okay. We stereotype in our heads, not because there's little Klansmen running around our heads or anything like that. It's because we have old biology and our brains take thousands and thousands of years to evolve. And like civilizations only existed for 10,000 years, right? We've only been eating corn and shit for that long. But we're still like, we have all this tribalistic stuff that has built into us that you cannot just change the machinery of stuff that goes on. And then the language around that evolves so quickly, right? It was like 1 week in 1940, you're a Negro, and then you're colored, and then you're an Afro-American, and then you're an African-American, and somehow it's still all right to call black. But it's like, are you black? Motherfucker, you brown? I'm so confused. I don't know what to call anybody, right? Look, and then
you personally have a special like segment that you get thrown into, being that you're half white, half black, technically.
Yeah, so but even that is weird, right? Where Barack Obama's half black, half white. Does he ever get called the first biracial president? No, he gets called the first black president, right?
Well, it's the one drop rule. If you have one drop of black blood in you, based on the way that things were set up in the past, that makes you black.
Yeah, and yeah, I agree, but I think it's also a lot about self-identity. Is that I think when you're biracial, we all make our own choice about where we feel closely identified. I personally have chosen not to make that distinction as like binary because I just don't think it's accurate. And it's also never been like, I don't know. I think there's these like signifiers, right, of like how people think, oh, this is what being black is, right? Mm-hmm. You know, being into hip hop culture is black, right? To some people, talking a certain way is black to certain people, but I don't know if the same thing is, it goes the other way, but I bet you in someone's head, they're like, you know what? Actually, what's her name? Quincy Jones's daughter, Rashida Jones. She's like, you know what? I'm really going to lean into this white thing, all right? Just, excuse me. I'm going to go, guys, I'm going to go win a couple Emmys. I'll see you next, you know. But, and by the way, and I'm not even trying to...
Wait, by the way, did you see Blackish? Not Blackish. Black AF. Hashtag Black AF.
I hated it.
You hated it. Why?
I thought Regina Jones was hilarious.
She's good because she's a professional actress. The guy, the husband dude, who's like the rich dude who's cast himself in his own show, can't act, and he should have if he would have cast JB Smoove in that role, or like Tracy Morgan, an actual talented comedic actor, then he'd be fine. But he put himself in there, and he did it.
Tracy Morgan would have been too much in that.
And it's a lot of like humble bragging, like, yeah, I make so much money. No, it's just I don't know. I didn't like it at all. But
I thought it was hilarious.
Listen, to each his own.
So you're wrong, and we're gonna fight about it later.
No, you win.
Yes. No,
you win.
No,
I give up.
So let me ask you this question: touring as a black man in a metal band, have you had any stupid bullshit happen?
Well, like I said, even that phraseology I don't necessarily feel comfortable with, because people, straight up, motherfuckers don't know what the fuck I am. Okay? People don't know whether I'm from Argentina, Saudi Arabia, fucking Italian. People don't know what I am. So I get it all. Right? Some people think I'm white. They're like, I get it all. And so I've had two experiences, but there were two experiences I wasn't even aware of. Well, actually, no. One experience I wasn't aware of, I was, apparently we were on tour with Hatebreed, and apparently there were like Nazi dudes following me around. And,
really?
And they were thwarted somehow by some other people, but I wasn't aware of it. And then the following day on the same tour, we were in Memphis. The one was in Knoxville, and we were in Memphis, and there was a guy in the crowd like Zeke Heiling to Hatebreed, and fucking the terror dudes fucking whooped this dude's ass.
Wow.
And so that wasn't necessarily towards me. And this goes back to what I was saying before about the perception, right? Like how we the filter we put on the world is that we see what you want to see, right? So there are a lot of people who their whole modality is the world is racist, so they're gonna find racism. And then listen, it's different. If, like I said, if you're Byron, my band, right? Dark-skinned black man, dreads, beard, tattoos, that guy gets a lot of attention, especially when you're driving around this country in all place, and he would get pulled over all the time. And so it's easy for someone like that to say, yes, there is racism, I've experienced it, and here, based on my experience, right? Someone like me, I don't have those same experiences because I look differently. And that's why that's why it was pissing me off when people try and compare their shit, right? Like people are like, well, as a gay man, let me tell you this, or as someone, it's like, yo, let's stop comparing our minority status. Like your thing is your thing, this thing is, but one thing about being black is you can't hide it.
Uh-huh.
And that just makes it unique in its own way. But for me, I was really lucky enough. I grew up in the inner city, mostly black, Hispanic people. Went to a mostly white private school when I was in college or in high school. So I got to like really grow up in a multicultural way. And that when you learn the social cues and how to be, that gives you real social mobility, right? That I can kind of like, I can exist in a lot of different environments. That social intelligence and education just put me in a way where I can just act as if, right?
Right.
And that's a big advantage, I think, in a lot of ways. So I never really perceived myself that way, especially because with God forbid, it was us. We were always together. So it was like, how were we being treated, or how were we being perceived? And that was, and yeah, there would be things and little whatever. But then I'll say this. That's also a lot of metal bands. When dudes roll up with like dudes with long hair and tattoos, and you're wearing leather jackets or whatever, like people kind of look at you crazy, no matter what.
Right.
But I do think my just the way I see the world is I don't look for these things. So someone I've had people say, "Oh, that person was being rude to you," and I just don't perceive it because I don't look for it.
Okay.
So that's a lot about the way I am, where I'm just not I just presume, I give people the benefit of the doubt, and I give situations the benefit of the doubt. And even if someone's being a dick to me, how do I really know why they're being a dick to me? You know what I'm saying? And so that's just the way I kind of perceive things. And it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means maybe my perception was not connected to that in a particular moment,
What I'll say is that I guess based on
my own personal perception, I perceive it more often than you do, just due to the darkness.
But that's my point. You're you, right? Just the way, same way, anyone who has their unique identity, whatever it is going to get a different experience. And this is the limitations of empathy, man. We can never know what it's like to be another person and walk around their shoes, exist in their experience. We're all summation of like our experiences, our traumas, our abuses, our family, our genetics, right? It's 1,000 different things that make us see the world the way we do. But I'm also, my attitudes towards racism are also very different than most people, where I think I've talked to a lot of white people who, mainly guys, who will almost divulge to me times in their past where they have been racist or felt racism. And I approach it with a very compassionate viewpoint because like I said before, I do think a lot of racist attitudes are natural and cultural. And a lot of those people feel bad about it and they feel shitty and they just don't know any better. You know what I'm saying? Like, so you have to like be compassionate, educate them, and make it. And I think a lot of shit that's happened in the last 10, 15 years, especially like surrounding Obama getting office, was a lot of like people were shoving this shit down and they just weren't talking about it. And then Obama comes in, Trump, and it all comes out. And you need to create an environment where people can express themselves. It can't just be, hey man, this conversation's for us. Shut up. You can. That's not sustainable.
Right.
My opinion.
All right, last question, because I know you got to go. Your last episode of the X-Men, when you were talking to Jessica, I thought it was very interesting, and you seemed kind of almost taken aback by it a little bit when she mentioned that moving from New York to L.A. was more extreme than moving from New York to Sweden, where she went. And I was curious your feelings as far as going from New Jersey out to LA and what your take is on that whole situation, because I've never been out there, and everyone that I know that's moved out there says the lifestyle is totally different.
Yeah.
So I'll preface your response just to get something in before we wrap this up. Gary, I've been to LA or Southern California 12 times, and I almost moved my whole life out there before I bought my house.
Wow.
So for me, it's actually the perfect place. I would love to be in Southern California. I feel like the vibe is more in tune with what I would personally like to live within. LA notwithstanding, because LA is slightly a different whole different thing going on. But I'm talking like the area between LA and San Diego, this one specific town, Oceanside, is the one that I would personally like to live in because it gives you the opportunity to live both lives. But go ahead, Doc.
Well, one, I think LA is different than anywhere, period. Like, there's just no place like it. And it has to do with the entertainment industry and the type of people that attracts and everything around that. But me, I've always liked it from day one. But because a lot of people, the cliche is, well, I don't like the people in LA because they're fake, right? That's the whole thing. And it's like, I get that, and it's not wrong. It's just it kind of misses the point. Is that people who are here to do acting, music, whatever, comedy, they're here for a reason. Like, it's about like work and performing, and that whole public persona thing permeates everything. So like when you talk to someone, everything's going to kind of surround that because that's what everyone's about. And so that might come off in a way where it's like, I just want people to be people. I'm like, yeah, I get that, and that's fine, and I enjoy that too. And when you get out of LA and you just go and hang out with normal people, like, oh, I forgot what hanging out with normal people was like.
Right.
I totally get that, but I do love the idea of, dude. Someone said this, like, you ever watch like Entourage?
Mm-hmm.
And like the guy Eric, who is the manager. It's right. Like, he didn't go to manager school. He just showed up in LA and was like, I'm a manager. And there's nowhere else really you can do shit like that. You just show up and you're like, and you can just start from scratch. Like, I'm this. I'm a rapper. I'm a comedian. I'm a model, whatever. And
just make it work.
Yeah, and I think it's tough in terms of like it's expensive and it's cold in some ways. Like, you know, like if you fall in with the wrong crowd, it can be, you know, you can find some really shitty people. But it's also like, I don't know, I just feel you're just always on the precipice if you're really ambitious of you can get into any circle you want to. Whereas New York felt like gatekeeper upon gatekeeper upon gatekeeper, where like if you weren't with these people, you're not getting in. Whereas like in LA, you can go from any level to any level as long as you're willing to kind of do the work, have the talent, have the ability. And it's just, and I get it, there's a lot of things people don't like, whether it's, I know the shutdowns piss off a lot of people and hurt a lot of people's businesses, and the homelessness situation is really bad, and you know, it's, you know, trash in a lot of places and it's dirty in some places. I get all that, and it's definitely not perfect, but I think, I don't know, once everything opens back up again, I think a lot of people who left are going to be like, you know,
I shouldn't have left.
Yeah, so, well, but I get it. Listen, I think it's good. I don't think we should have all the people in like 4 places. I think we should. I think people spreading out a little bit is probably a good thing. But I love it, and I'm not. You know, when it's popping here, it's an energy like nowhere else. You know, and hopefully it gets going, because if there's no like social scene and shows and all that stuff, LA is not really LA. But it's, tell you, I live a half mile from the beach, Long Beach. It's beautiful every day. You know, it's just. Yeah, I love that aspect of it very much.
So what I'll say is, one of the things that's interesting is I went from the city to the beach to the mountains to skiing all within one day. You could do anything you want to do around Southern California, because there's a little bit of everything, from amusement parks to the ocean to the deserts. You could get to Vegas in 3 hours.
Yeah, you can go.
You could do whatever you want.
In a few hours, you can go see the best magic show 1 second, and go see like Dave Chappelle show up and do stand up, and then go to the Rainbow and Slash comes in. And you're like, what the? This is sick, you know. But like I said, that's not happening right now. But hopefully,
it could.
Hopefully, in a few months, we gets back to going. So
hopefully,
Doc, I appreciate you being on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man.
I actually want to have you back on. If you will come back on, because I want to talk about movies, because clearly your posters behind you leave a whole plethora of things that we could actually talk about, and I just want to actually get into what makes Doc tick, like himself, not like on your personal time, which I assume you have not a lot of, but when you have personal time, I want to find out more about you.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do a part 2. Like I said, this week is particularly crazy because we're doing all the in-person vocal auditions, so it's a busy week, but after like a week and a half, 2 weeks, it'll kind of open up again.
I'll reach out. I'll catch you.
That would be awesome, because I wanted to talk about last words. You guys are talking about music formats, and I want to get into that, because we've had that conversation on here a few times too.
Well, right on.
Get back to my old record store music business days.
Well, listen, I really appreciate it. And let's schedule a part 2. All right.
Yeah, definitely, man.
All right. Next time, hopefully, I won't have to run. And this, I was gonna have all this opened up, and then they booked me last minute, and I'm gonna be late for practice, but it's all right. I'm always late.
You're doing good work.
All right.
Send me a bill. Take care.
What's your social media?
At Doc Coyle. Just my
everywhere.
Instagram, everywhere. Twitter.
All the
Friendster
too. All right, fellas. Good night.
Thanks, man. TheUpgradePodcast.net for all of your social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram. We are not on Parler. Once again,
soon to be on the new MySpace. Space Hey, hey boy,
hey.
But I do want to just send a secondary shout out to Doc. Appreciate him being on the show.
Yeah, so much more that we wanted to talk to him about, but time is limited.
Hey, when you're a rock star, time is limited.
I can say he's a very busy man between music and podcasts and video shows and everything else. I'm not knocking it. It's good to be busy and keep busy, especially with all the nonsense going on right now.
Hell yeah.
Oh, good for him. Living in Cali and loving that life. So yeah, upgradedpodcast.net, the upgrade. I mean, it works either way. And that's it. We'll see you next week. Peace.
Peace.